All right, everybody. So it's time to start. All right, this is Ask Me Anything for movies and TV. I had this idea of just doing some pop culture stuff to see whether it was fun and people wanted to do it. So anyway, why don't we start? Who's got questions? Feel free to raise your hand. Let's see. Well, let's see. All right. Well, we've got definitely people in the meeting. Let's see. Um, let's see here. All right. Let's see. I got a hand from Tom Kane.
I have a question, but it's not about TV.
All right.
Well,
Well, let's
I
see. Why
read your
don't we
book.
hold non movie and TV questions for a while anyway,
All
and
right, I'll hold him. I'll hold him.
else then we'll do that. But otherwise, let's see. All right. Hmm. Right. Well, let's see. All right, Tom. Well, if no one's got any other questions, we'll take your question on anything. That's fine.
Well, I enjoyed your book about, I've got it right behind me. Well, I wish I had more kids, but
Mhm.
I noticed that you were unable to persuade your wife. And I was wondering if that's an economic consideration that
Mhm.
maybe the woman has a bigger cost and therefore her cost of having more kids isn't worth it for her, even though it might be worth it for the men and for the society as a whole, maybe not for the women. I just wondered what you thought about
Right. Well,
that.
so I do have four kids, so it's not clear exactly what happened.
Okay.
Yeah, so I do have four. I mean, again, here's the thing: like the whole idea of that book is to say that parents are needlessly making parenting harder than it actually has to be. And I would say precisely because women are usually the ones that are putting in more effort, they actually are the ones making the bigger mistake, and their calculations are more off.
Hmm.
So now you may say, well, maybe it still makes sense for them to want fewer. I mean, here's the thing is if we just take a look at the like all world data, what we see is there is very little disagreement between men and women by country about how many kids they want to have. It is not true, for example, that in countries that have really high birth rates, that men want that and women don't. Instead, if you go to a country like Niger, where they're having 6 or 7 kids, you'll see that the desired family size for men and women is very similar at like 6 to 7. So I would say that it's not true that in general men want to have more kids than women. It's also not true the other way around. Probably the simplest story is that the costs are higher for women, but the benefits are higher for women too, because they actually spend a lot more time with kids and have a closer connection with them and do more things with them. But I mean, the real thing that, or the real value that that book adds is to say that, hey, there's just a lot of needless suffering that parents are enduring. Since women are doing more of the work, they have more needless suffering. And then the second part is after you stop doing the stuff that is actually not giving a return, you want to reoptimize. Since women are the ones that are more wrong about what you really need to do in order to help your kids to get to the level that you want. I say they're the ones that are actually more mistaken on that. It definitely is true that I've had a lot more influence with dads than moms. So normally when I persuade people to have more kids, it's because there was a dad who was saying no and a mom that was saying yes. And the book changes the dad's no to a yes, and then away we go. Not in every case. I do have one Russian American friend who had three, and then she read my book, and now she's up to seven, and she does give me credit. So we do have that.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, sure. All right. So, any question at all about the worlds of movies and television? Anything you're on your mind? Let's see. Okay. Jonas, what do you got? Jonas, speak.
Okay, so unmute. Okay.
Hi,
All
Jonas.
right. Hi. Hi, Dr. Kaplan.
How you
Nice
doing?
to see you again. Good. How are you? All
Pretty
right.
good.
So my question was kind of one of my guilty pleasures is 90 Day Fiance. And I'm wondering,
90 Day Fiance. All
yes,
right.
it's a reality show. I'm wondering,
Mhm.
have you ever seen the show? And given that like, you're into like open borders and all that,
Mhm.
like I'm wondering, do you think like maybe this might have a positive or negative, effect on people moving towards people to be more accepting of immigration or immigrants in general, or any
So
opinions at
I'm
all?
weak on reality TV. Could you tell us the idea of the show?
All right. So basically, as you may be aware, there's a K-1 visa in the US,
Mhm.
which
Okay.
allows you to bring your fiance. You must
Right,
have
right,
met
right.
in person at least once. You bring your fiance, and then you have to get married
Mhm.
within 90 days, or they have to go back,
Right, right. Okay. So
basically.
the fiance visa. All right. And
Yeah, and
these are all like purporting to be legitimate fiance visas, or people lie in order to get on the show, or what?
well, some people, honestly, I will say, some people they make you wonder, like
Uh,
if they're like kind of using the American, or maybe that the American is using them,
sure.
for whatever to get like like a hotter partner than they would otherwise
Right,
get,
sure.
things like that, and yeah, it's basically a reality show about that. It started with just the K-1 visa, but now they have all these spin-offs like 90 Day Happily Ever After. That's like after they're married and like kicking
Mhm.
back in on them. Then there's 90 Days the Other Ways, where
Mhm.
American goes to another country who marries a foreigner and goes to live in their country and stuff. That
Mhm.
one's one of the most interesting, honestly. But anyway, so yeah.
I mean, my general view is that art actually has very little effect upon people's political views. It's real. People think that it's so much more emotionally affecting and it changes people's minds. I agree, it gets eyeballs, it gets attention. But in terms of actually making someone rethink a policy view, I think that it's extremely unusual that happens. There was a much earlier show by Morgan Spurlock, the one who did the McDonald's hatchet
Yeah,
job.
yeah, yeah. Super
And
sizing.
so remember, he did one on immigration that I did watch. And a big part of it is he had a guy who was a border guard, a volunteer border guard, and they took him over
Yeah,
to Mexico to go and meet people that were there. And the guy actually was, I think he was Cuban, so he already spoke Spanish and he got to know the people. And at the end, he's like, gee, I don't want to be a border guard anymore because I feel so sorry for them. But, that's why we need to go and have just stricter general immigration enforcement. So it did not actually change his mind about what policy should be. It changes his mind about whether he personally felt like doing this as a hobby any longer. I mean, the main thing I would say that's going on at an intellectual level is just the fact that there's fiance visas exist means that every single American has an incredibly valuable asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, actually. Because if you just think about what would be the price if you could go and sell this fiance visa to anyone who wanted it would get hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's very little doubt of that. You may think
yeah.
they don't have it, but we already see how much money people come up with just for human smuggling.
Student
And if
visas.
it was,
Yeah, yeah.
and this is way better than human smuggling, it's definitely going to work. And furthermore, you'll be totally legal once it's done. So there is the puzzle. Why is there such a small fraction of Americans who have this incredibly valuable asset actually take advantage of it? I've got this early blog post where I say that probably the main thing going on is that even though American men are desired around the world and are considered among the very best kind of men by women almost everywhere, and just considered like some of the nicest, most decent guys around, even so, the problem is this adverse selection that when someone does this, you really have to wonder, are they just going and doing this for the green card or not? And I think this does really greatly reduce the strength of this market because the fundamentals are incredible. It's like hundreds of I've got an asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It seems like I should find somebody on earth who thinks that I'm good. There's also, of course, a big gender bias here because the non-first world has a lot more wives that are desired or potential wives that are desired by American men than the other way around.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more of what American men are looking for than what American women are looking for outside of the first world. And so it does seem like there would be a lot bigger than it is, but there's just this problem of worried about getting played for a fool. And if you know the laws, more deeply, there's actually this extra exception saying that if the marriage doesn't last 2 years, then the foreigner gets deported unless there's abuse, which is a
Yes.
very strong incentive for fabricating accusations of abuse. I know at least one guy where he got basically an arranged marriage in India, and then she didn't like him at all. Like, he was not a very attractive guy. But if that guy was abusing her, then my whole worldview would have to be changed, because like he would be abused. He wouldn't abuse anyone. He was just too weak, and so, like just not the right personality. So in the end, the marriage didn't work out, and he's dragged through this further hell of being falsely accused of abuse. And then I think he was managed to escape any US punishment, but I think he was banned for life from India.
Wow.
Yeah. But in terms of what this is really doing for people's views on policy, I really doubt it. I mean, probably the only show that I think had a really strong influence on policy was probably Will and Grace, which probably did actually make a big difference for support for gay marriage. Although
Right, yeah,
probably there were actually a bunch of sympathetic gay characters on TV that gradually changed it. At least that seems like one of the better stories. But that's one where we also have a lot of other information saying that one of the main things that changes people's minds about gays is having a close gay friend or family member, which tends to happen fairly randomly, actually. So that's not so surprising that so that's one on this list of exceptions where it actually matters whether you personally know someone. I mean, probably precisely because it's like, well, what difference does it really make? It's like doesn't really require that much of a revision of your overall policy views. All right, other questions? Yeah, so we got one from Sam. What are your thoughts on the often contradictory views of media? Let's see, let me read the whole thing. From life-changing to boring to rage-inducing is mostly creative writing exercise, signaling true meaningful differences in interpretation. So this is like why is it that the same movie will get good reviews from some people, bad reviews from others? Is that the idea? Let's see. Yes. So I mean, first of all, I would say that so I used to actually follow reviews very closely, because up until 2015, my view is that the fiction was not very politicized, or at least television and movies were not very politicized. So I actually thought the reviews were generally reliable, and no particular review, but to see that something had 80 or 90% positive reviews, I thought was a pretty strong sign. Even then, I thought there were some biases. In particular, comedies generally we used to get bad reviews relative to how good I thought the movies were. So for comedies, I would usually bump them up like 20 or 30 percentage points on Rotten Tomatoes. But on the other hand, like horror movies generally I thought got fair reviews, even though you could say that horror movies are lowbrow, but it seemed like somehow the people reviewing them didn't have a big axe to grind against them. So yeah, I would say at least until 2015, I thought there was actually a fairly high correlation in movie reviews, in that you would see that well-regarded movies would generally have overwhelmingly positive reviews, poorly reviewed ones would have a lot of negative reviews. Of course, there are always some movies that were in the middle. Probably a lot of what's going on is just that movies, this is one where tastes vary, for entertainment a lot more than they vary for just matters of fact. So, there's going to be more uniform reviews for whether something is a good video camera than for whether something is a good movie. We can agree the TV is good or that the projector is good more readily than that we can agree that what's showing it is good. In terms of what's leading to, what would lead to so much disagreement. Like I said, I don't think the disagreement was that high. But even were ones where you could say that it's 50% positive and negative. I'd say the positive ones were usually weekly positive. The negative ones were weekly negative. It still was unusual that there would be a movie where they had some people giving it 4 stars and some giving it 1. So that was always unusual. So in terms of what else is going on, one factor is definitely just age. Right. So, if there's movies that are designed to appeal to a younger demographic, then older people see them and say, this just seems like junk to me. Flipping it around, when younger people see older movies, there's often a reaction, wow, these are really boring. Can't believe people watch this stuff back in those days. So that's part of it. There was, like before 2015, I'd say politics just played a pretty small role. I mean, at the time, of course, there's long the stereotype of left-wing Hollywood, but if you actually watch movies before 2015, it is amazing how completely apolitical they are. If you watch movies like Back to the Future or Terminator, and it's like, is this a left-wing or right-wing movie? I mean, other than saying shooting guns is right-wing or something like that, then say there wasn't very much going on. Since 2015, I think there has been a great politicization of movies. And so now I just stopped reading reviews because I just, it's figure that there's such an axe to grind. Of course, for almost all mainstream reviewers, it would be a strong left-wing axe to grind. You might say, why not just go and take and basically multiply by -1? But I don't think that helps that much either, honestly. So yeah, it is disappointing that movie reviews have gotten so unreliable, but I don't think they were that bad beforehand. Yeah, so I'd probably leave it there. All right, other questions? Yeah, Gerardo or Gerardo?
Gerardo, but you may call me
Gerardo.
Jerry.
All right. All
Very
right.
nice to meet you, Professor
Bienvenidos.
Kaplan. Muchas gracias. My question, I'd love to do a follow-up on what you just commented on the disparity between users and critics' reviews. But what I originally wanted to ask was whether you know of any particularly interesting media that depicts either positively or negatively the topics you've been talking about throughout your books, anarcho-capitalism or open immigration and stuff like that. Anything of that nature?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I'm just going to say that I do not have a big political line where it's like I'll only watch movies that I agree with. I mean, sort of my slogan is I'll watch 5 movies from pretty much any viewpoint. I would even watch like the 5 best North Korean movies if someone could actually credibly get them to me. It's the 6th movie of a objectionable viewpoint where it's like, all right, I've heard enough of this. I don't need to go and get brainwashed anymore. And that becomes tiresome. In terms of movies where I just really liked it on a philosophical level, probably the biggest one is actually Captain Fantastic, which is a movie about a very free-thinking, highly intellectual homeschooling dad who basically raises his kids exactly the way that he wants. And he's very natalist. He's got 6 kids. So now the striking thing about it is that he's like a total Noam Chomsky fan, but like if you just watch the movie, it's like, well, like no actual Noam Chomsky fan is anything like this guy. He's like super open-minded and he's just always eager to have a discussion. And like, give me this family, give me like a week to go and teach them econ. And like they're exactly the right temperament to do a full conversion on them. And so like the dad is like goes and talks about how he's making fun of the idea of the business of America's business and so on. But again, they're so reasonable, so open-minded that it's just not a stable equilibrium, I would say. Now there's a lot more focus on math and science. So like in that part, he totally knows his stuff, of course. And then, you suppose in the movie, they all know like 4 languages. They know German, Chinese, like Mandarin, and let's say something else too. But let's see. And then, like the other crazy thing about the movie is that he's actually raising them literally off the grid out in the woods. So it's also a survivalist movie. When I took my sons there, I was homeschooling them and I said, I'm not going to tell you anything about this movie. Let's just go and I just want you to go and watch it. I'd already seen it. And for the first 5 minutes, like, is this like a zombie apocalypse movie? Because it's just some people hunting animals in the woods. And then it's like, no, it's actually about this kind of megalomaniacal dad going and he thinks he's got everything figured out and he's raising his kids just as he wants. So that's one that really, just really stayed with me. And I've got a couple of blog posts on it if you want to get more details on it. But that one I just love so much. Let's see. Other ones, There is an Italian version of We the Living that is quite good if you just want to watch the best Ayn Rand movie ever shot. This movie has quite a story because it was shot in the middle of World War II in fascist Italy, and it's a very faithful adaptation of We the Living, which at first it seemed like they could do because it's anti-communist, but almost as soon as it was released, the fascist government banned it because it's all about these individualists who are refusing to go and comply with the government, and the fascist censors like, this could be us that are talking about it, not really anything specific. There's there's a couple of other Ayn Rand movies which just aren't very good. There's the Gary Cooper Fountainhead, which just isn't very good. And then there is the Atlas Shrugged trilogy that was made a few years ago, where pretty much they were gonna lose the IP unless they immediately made the movie, and yeah, it shows. It's just not very good, and they didn't even have the money to go and use the same cast. So basically, each movie they just recast it, even though it's all done by the same producer. So that's not too good. Let's see, in terms of other movies that I like politically, so there's a list of the great anti-communist movies. So there's The Killing Fields, about the Cambodian genocide. I remember that when Joker came out, Tyler proclaimed it the most right-wing movie ever. And I said, what about The Killing Fields? That's like way. And he's like, it doesn't count. Yeah, it counts. All right, so there's that one. Let's see. There's the recent movie, Mr. Smith, just about the Walter Duranty cover-up of the Ukrainian famine and the guy that went and tried to expose him at the time. That one's pretty good. See, and then obviously you've got a bunch of great anti-communist Chinese movies made during this 25-year window where you could say almost anything bad you wanted about Mao. So I just watched the 30th anniversary re-release of Farewell My Concubine, which is just a great history of China shown through the lens of Chinese opera. Really, a very bitter attack upon Maoism. And then there's a bunch of other ones done by Chen Kaige and Zhang Yimou, which all are among the very best. In terms of actual Russian anti-communist movies, there's not anything that, at least nothing that really stands to mind. There's a couple of really great movies made under Stalin. So Alexander Nevsky and Ivan the Terrible, which are both great primarily because they have original scores from Prokofiev, which are just so good. So Alexander Nevsky, that's one where if you know the music from Prokofiev, it's just a tremendous score. And then early in the movie, they show German invaders just going and grabbing Russian kids and burning them alive. And oh my God, this is horrifying. And then the backstory is after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Alexander Nevsky was pulled from all the Soviet theaters for a year and a half. And then once Hitler double-crossed him, put it right back in. But anyway, I would just say that those movies are really good based upon just the music. The scores are so good. And Ivan the Terrible is also interesting because it's not that sympathetic a depiction of Ivan the Terrible. Stalin basically told the director, I think it was Sergei Eisenstein, that you can show him being a horrible, doing horrible things, but we must see why it was all necessary. So that was the Stalin's line. It was like, you don't need to sugarcoat the brutality, but it needs to be clear that he did what had to be done. So you can show Ivan the Terrible looking really evil and doing evil things, but the lesson has to be, whatever it takes for Mother Russia, that's fine. All right, so that's I'm only beginning there, but I could come back to that. I got something from Bernat.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bernat first, since you haven't done a question yet.
Oh, hey.
Hey, how's it going? Boguslav.
Yeah, I'm great. I was just
All right, middle of the night for you, right?
Yeah, exactly, and especially since I was sleep deprived already, and it's
All
now
right.
4
All right,
hours.
so you
of
must
sleep
have an important
again.
question.
No. I just like asking questions in general.
Okay, what do you got?
And I've got a day off. Okay, anyway, so I just wanted to ask the question that I asked you in Poland again, but we didn't elaborate on that a lot. namely, do you know any movies with Epicurean themes? And my proposal was Groundhog Day. And at first glance,
Repeat the name. Repeat the name of it.
Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day.
And at first glance, it shouldn't be hard to find. It's not Epicureanism. It's not a philosophy like, I don't know, Kantian, Wittgensteinian, gay communism. It's like a really simple philosophy that should be, you know, in pretty much every movie. But it's hard to think besides this one for me. So,
I mean, I'd say if you think about the ending of The Return of the King, there the theme is basically Sam goes back to just living a normal life, and that's actually the best one. And the way that it's built up in the story is like, you know, like this task has been appointed to us. If we don't do it, nobody will. But what I'd really like to do is not be a hero at all and just stay home. The Hobbit kind of undercuts it because he starts off with his Epicurean paradise, and then he gets sucked into an adventure. And then at the end, he is, you know, he's never the same. He's never the same again, and he still has a lot of nostalgia for it. But in the actual original Lord of the Rings trilogy, I think that does have this Epicurean theme of the hobbits are actually, in some sense, the wisest people. There's also the ending of, I can't remember whether this scene made it into the movie, but the ending of The Hobbit has Thorin on his deathbed saying, "Bring Bilbo to me," and then say, you know, like if more people in this world just valued good food and good cheer, this would be a so much better place, and value that over gold. But you know, good world or not, I have to leave it now. So that would be pretty good example anyway. So let's see. It seems like there are a lot of movies where like an ordinary person gets forced into having an adventure, and then at the end they're able to go back to their normal lives. But I'd have to go through and think about some of those. Let's see. So, like if you think about, so you Back to the Future. So this is one where he, you know, it's totally accidental that he finds himself in this world, and then his goal is just to prevent his family's existence and his own existence from being erased. So it's not that he really has a goal other than returning things to normal. Although then at the end of the movie, it turns out that he's accidentally fixed some things, so his life is better than it was initially. Like his dad is now a successful science fiction writer because he inspired him. But it still is sort of the theme of getting things back to normal, and that was really the ideal thing anyway. So maybe it's not so uncommon. I mean, obviously, like think about this. Almost every horror movie kind of has the Epicurean theme of things were much better before this started happening. And then at the end, it's like, okay, God, thank God I survived, which, and often people are actually really happy to have survived. And it's like, in a sense, that's an Epicurean theme because it's about when your expectations have been reduced very low, then you can become very happy just with having what you had, which you were not really satisfied with before. Maybe one of the best Epicurean moments in all of cinema. In the movie Saw, you've got two guys that are chained in a room, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, but they see that there is a tape recorder in the middle of the room. And they manage by working together to go and get the tape recorder. And if you freeze frame on Cary Elwes, when they get the tape recorder, like again, they're like chained up, like horrible conditions. It looks like they're gonna die. And then he gets the tape recorder. He's like, yes. And you like freeze that, and you're like, that moment of joy is so sincere, and it is what you would feel in this situation, where once you get your expectations down to rock bottom, this actually almost irrelevant accomplishment of I got this tape recorder, suddenly you're really happy because you just exceeded your expectations. So that is just a scene that I think has a very strong Epicurean theme if you're paying attention to it. Yeah, but obviously any movie about heroes is not very Epicurean, because anytime there's people heroes, there's like, well, I could live this ordinary life, right? And if you think about, anti-Epicurean speeches, so the big speech that Mel Gibson gives in Braveheart, where he says, look, if you run away, you'll probably live. And it's like, but wouldn't you want to be able to say, I stood there and fought, right? So that's quite anti-Epicurean. And same thing in Kenneth Branagh's Henry V, where he says, there's all these men that are currently asleep in England, and we wouldn't trade them one scrap of our glory, because we here, we happy few who are risking our lives. This is the really great life. And there's all of these men back in England who will one day hold their honor cheap because they didn't fight with us. So yeah, those are more typical heroic movies. All right, Tom.
So today I found out that Matthew Perry died a long time ago. But anyway, may he
2
rest.
weeks, right?
I guess, yeah, October something.
Yeah.
And so he's worth 120 million dead. And but
Right,
what
so he didn't blow through all his money.
apparently not. He took a lot of drugs, but apparently not
Yeah.
all.
Drugs are
But,
cheaper than I thought.
Plus played for a lot of rehab at the same time.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, what got me was the comment in the Wikipedia article about Friends, and it had a 10-year run and they're 11, and then in the middle of somewhere they were making $1 million per person per week.
Yep. Per episode.
That boggled my mind. That means they're selling advertising worth way more than that. And not only that, how did they ever negotiate a contract like that? I mean, you didn't just walk in and say, well, I want $1 million, I'm quitting. Maybe you did say that. But I mean, I'm just kind of overwhelmed. I'm not sure that's a question, but there it is.
I mean, so I would say that definitely for a show like that, they're also thinking about syndication rights. And shows like that, I think in the long run, they may very well make more money from syndication than they ever made in the original run.
Okay.
So once you realize you've got a show of that caliber that people will want to watch for decades afterwards, that is one big thing that pushes up demand.
Okay.
I mean, so like I remember the media coverage of every time they renegotiated their salary for that show. So it was one where basically every couple of years they renegotiate. Their initial salaries were very modest. None of them were big stars at the first. There is the question about why it is that you don't specify in the original contract that what exactly the salary will be, and also say, and if you ever try to renegotiate, there'll be massive damages that will be imposed on you. The most functionalist econ story is actually that would be shooting yourself in the foot. You want to give them large raises if the show goes really well, because you want the stars to have really big buy-in and also to be promoting the show and that kind of thing. So maybe there's something to that. Maybe it's just one where it's sufficiently rare that a show does that well that they actually, at least in those days, weren't putting every contingency into the contract. There's also the idea that if you don't give them enough money, they could sort of sabotage the show by just not doing a very good job. It's too hard to specify. So you want the really big stars to feel like they're getting, like they got buy-in and that they are actually basically co-owners of the show. So I think that, so it was definitely consistently in the top 10, probably top 5. And it's all, it's just one where it just takes a while to realize that you've got something that is going to be really successful, really popular. And especially it takes a couple of seasons to build. And that's when people start negotiating. Like another big part of it is that, and initially like the surplus just isn't that big. And then as more money comes in, it's like, hey, like I could just start asking for more without killing the show. That was one where the 6 stars, they did have a cartel amongst themselves, and they said, we'll always negotiate and we'll get equally large salaries. For Seinfeld, I think that the 3 co-stars negotiated together, but I think Jerry might have done it separately. Can't remember though. I don't think Jerry got the same salary as the other 3. So I think that they were getting really large salaries too, but I think it was still recognized that Jerry was the star. I mean, there is, of course, also this big hit that you take when you recast a major role. There's a few famous shows where they did recast a major role, like Bewitched, where it just seems like even to this day, people are bitter about the recasting. So that's probably another part of it too, is you might think, well, like, what's the big deal? Just recast it. But this is one of the best examples of the endowment effect, where once an audience gets really attached to the 6 actors that play the 6 main characters, they just don't like the idea of changing it, even if you could say the next person's better. So like 2.5 Men, they recast Charlie Sheen. It seemed like that show did well for like a year or so, but then people just didn't want to watch it without Charlie Sheen after that. not sure what's going on with the Roseanne reboot. So it seemed like it was getting good ratings for a while without her, but I haven't heard. But I think has it been actually canceled since then? It seems like if they hadn't canceled her for her Hamas tweet, it might still be going strong. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions? Yeah. Gerardo.
Yeah, I've got another one for you.
Yep.
Here, so I'm just wondering how often you actually consume new shows.
Mhm.
My question is more geared towards this is, do you have a policy
Mhm.
on which ones you screen out and
Yeah.
such? Because I personally am frustrated with, getting hooked on a new show. First season is great, second season sucks, and
Yeah.
now they string me along for 10 seasons of a show which only had one good season, and I hate that. So you have a policy on that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm just an extreme free rider, and I just wait for other people to go and tell me it's really great. And I usually actually do delay for a couple of seasons to see where it's going. So that's yeah. So like I almost never just start watching a new show. I mean, I also like I was less so back when I was a religious reader of Entertainment Weekly. But again, once Entertainment Weekly got really woke, I just couldn't stand reading it anymore. And I've looked around and said, like, what is the non-woke equivalent of Entertainment Weekly? But people just can't give me anything. So there was a period when I was really on top of everything that was going on week by week. And now it does take longer. Although even back then, normally I would wait for people, like a lot of people, to say something was really good. So by the way, so like if I'm going to add any value, it will just be things that you are likely to have missed. So let's see. This is so I maybe I should have made a list, but fantastic movies that yes, so that's right. Yeah, Entertainment Weekly was part of the beautiful bubble back in the good old days when it wasn't very political. So like got a lot of movies that I am personally a fan of. It's just hard to see that very few other people pay much attention to them. Some of them were big at the time, and then people just lost interest in them, or they just didn't. Their word of mouth died out, and then some just never really were very successful. I just rewatched for about the sixth time a little horror movie called The Shrine, which it's one of those horror movies where it's a shame even to tell you what it's about. It's just so good, so scary, so gripping, and you really just cannot figure out what's going on until the very, very end, and yet it all makes sense. So I put a lot of weight on having a very logical plot structure that you understand perfectly in hindsight, but are baffled by in foresight. So to me, that's like really the peak of writing, where the writer has this constraint. It's got to make perfect sense. Every question you've got has to be answered. It's all going to be internally consistent. And yet the viewer is just kept off balance the entire movie. So to me, that's really fun. So The Shrine is just a great horror movie. Another great one, which is like horror/thriller, is called A Lonely Place to Die. That one, huge fan of that one. Something that was a lot bigger. It's now, let's see, I think it came out 22 years ago, was 21 Grams. So this one is with Sean Penn, who I do not like as a director, but I consider a phenomenal actor. And this movie is just such a great performance. Benicio del Toro, Naomi Watts. I mean, these three come together, and this is actually the first English language movie of Iñárritu, who's gotten a lot more famous since then for like Birdman and The Revenant. But and then his first his Spanish language movie, I guess he's done two. So his other Spanish, but his really good one is Amores Perros, which was huge at the time. I think it made at least got nominated for best foreign film. But it's just so good in that. And then he was able to use that to break into U.S. cinema. Before he just did commercials in Spanish, I think maybe videos. I think it was actually commercials. But that one is really good. Let's see. Couple of Japanese movies that you're not likely to have heard of. So there's one that is called Harakiri. So that one is actually pretty famous. It was remade also. The remake's really good, and its color, it's gorgeous, but the original is even better. And then he has a more obscure movie called Samurai Rebellion, which is just so good. I'm on the verge of tears watching this thing. Again, it's one where it seems like it's just going to be like a giant samurai battle. but it's actually that combined with a love story, combined with a great family drama. And it's, it's like, it's one where like you almost feel changed just to have watched it. It's such great performances, such great delivery. And it's, it's a quintessential Japanese story. It's a story that wouldn't really make sense in almost any other culture, but you very easily get immersed in it. So that one, big fan of as well. Let's see.
You go deep with these. Like We the Living, the one you were talking about earlier, is from 1942.
Yeah. So, basically it just stayed sitting in an archive for years. And then somehow, I think Ayn Rand watched it. And it was like, and now I no longer feel like suing you into the ground for violating my intellectual property. She liked it so much that she just forgave the people that were involved for making it in the war in total violation. And then, so she endorsed the movie actually, and but it was only in the 80s that the movie got any actual notable attention. But yeah, that one is quite good, way better than The Fountainhead. And then those Atlas Shrugged movies are not good.
What about horror, Brian? Because so right now you've been talking a little bit about horror and all over the place, but mentioning horror especially. Are you a big fan of horror?
Yeah, a huge horror fan. Let's see. So like horror is one where you can do a great movie with hardly any budget, and you just have to get like no stars, just talent. Like works really well in horror. In a way, sometimes when you have a big star in horror, it's a little distracting because it's like Matthew McConaughey's in danger or whatever. Whereas, like in a way, it's easy to relate to like someone that you've never seen before being in moral danger, because like that could more be me. Let's see. But since I did mention Matthew McConaughey, another one which got good attention at the time, but I think very few people remember it, is Frailty, which is. So it's again, I don't want to give anything away about the movie. It's one where like you get sucked in and then you think you understand what's going on, and then at the end you're like, oh my god, this is way more horrifying than I thought. So I always like that. I was a huge fan of the original Saw, which was like I just rewatched and I think totally held up, and then I rewatched Saw 2 and I thought that really held up. Partly I was interested because I just heard that I saw that Saw 10 got great reviews, and I'm like, wow, it's pretty hard to get great reviews for the 10th movie in a series. So I did, and I just had some time in LA. So, all right, I'll go see it. And like, all right, it's pretty good. And there were people claiming it was the best in the series, which I just thought was absurd. It was really, like it was definitely a solid movie. And also one where it just struck me that the lead. So first of all, they turned the killer into pretty much the hero of Saw 10. And so like you take this guy who's like a psycho, and it's like, no, actually let's sort of make him a hero, and you're buying it. But what really
Jigsaw
is that Saw 10, he basically is the hero.
Hey, spoilers. Yeah, that's another one. That's another question.
It's not much of a spoiler because it's like pretty clear within a few minutes that he's the hero. It's not like it's not the big twist at the end or anything. Oh my god. But what's really striking to me is that the actor is 80. Tobin Bell is 80. They don't do any digital de-aging or anything. I was reading about it, and they said that they didn't do that for him or his accomplice, Shawnee Smith, because they just said, like, we just feel like with de-aging that we lose too much of the close-up expression accuracy. So they decided and it is intended chronologically to happen in between Saw 1 and 2. So where like originally aired 20 years ago. So it is sort of ridiculous to see these actors are 20 years older. I mean, going from 60 to 80 was not that much of a change. So you barely even notice it for the main star, but for Shawnee Smith, it's quite noticeable because he goes from 30 to 50. But anyway, what was really striking about that is like when I was a kid, there were no 80-year-old leading men. like that would have just been like, you can't have the leading man be 80. That's like the dad or the grandfather of leading man. And there is a story in the industry about what happened, which is Liam Neeson in the Taken series. Those movies made so much money, and he was already in his 60s. And then people suddenly said, like, why do we need action heroes to be in their 20s or 30s or even 40s? And actually, a lot of new action scripts started to be explicitly written for the hero in his 60s. And it's like, well, fine, once we're in our 60s, then about 80. So it is just a striking change in terms of what's going on. I also do have a theory that this is wokeness related because the level of discrimination towards white male actors has gotten high enough that that the pipeline has just been thinned down for white male acting talent. Whereas before there would just be a whole bunch that you would go and cast in their 20s, and there'd be an ensemble movie, and then whoever pops would get to be a big star. And now there's just basically no ensemble movies about a bunch of white guys that are shot anymore, at least for theatrical release, which means that we're like the pipeline is just greatly reduced. But for characters like that, it's like, well, who will audiences believe now? And since they have cut off the pipeline, they're like, well, let's just go and get a guy that from a previous generation. Right? So, there are a lot of movies from late 80s, early 90s, like there's one, School Ties. And if you just look at who's in that cast, you can't believe how many stars are in the cast. It's got, I think, Matt Damon, Brendan Fraser, it's got Ethan Hawke, and it's got a couple of other famous people. And, so basically it's just, at the time, it's just an ensemble drama where Brendan Fraser is a Jew at a fancy school and the other guys are horrible jerks to him. But out of movies like that, this is where you would go and get a lot of the talent for who's going to be the next generation of action heroes. All of those guys became action heroes. Yeah. And now we just don't really make movies like that, or Hollywood doesn't make movies like that anymore. So now again, you might say, why don't they go and use their woke casting for to be the big stars? And it's like, yeah, we're woke, but we just don't think that we've got a new actor of color that is going to be that good, that is going to bring in the audiences. Whereas in the past, when it was, so I think it really was a lot more meritocratic in the past. So in the past, you'd have Denzel Washington as the one character, and then he's just awesome on his merits, and and people just get used to him as like part of the ensemble, and then he can carry a movie on his own. But when you're just doing really strong affirmative action casting, which was really what I do see in most modern Hollywood movies, is people are just like, they're just miscast. It's not that you have to have a white guy for this movie, but this guy does not seem like a hero, would not seem like a hero to in any culture. And so it's just hard to deal with it. Probably the most ridiculous one of all was, what's her name? Octavia Spencer, as the scary villain in Ma. And I'm just like, she's not scary. She's just she's just not I don't care what she does. She's not scary. She's completely miscast. And this is obviously just a vehicle for an ideology. So it's come on, all right. So that was a small rant tacked on. Yes. Yeah. So, so I just saw Napoleon, and there, I was coming up with sort of the levels of wokeness of movies, and there's zero, where it's could have been easily made in 2010 or 2000. You wouldn't even know the difference. And then there's the one where there's obvious affirmative action in casting, but there's nothing philosophical or anything in the entire movie about it. It's just people seem to be miscast, and pretty obviously, in order to go and satisfy philosophy. And then you start having the level where you've got minor speeches and so on, and then you've got the one where there's major speeches, and finally you have the one where the entire universe is wokeified, like the movie Promising Young Woman. This is a bit of a spoiler, but it's it is one of the better woke movies, but basically it's one where you think there's going to be one decent guy in the entire movie, and it turns out, no, he's a horrible rapist too. It's just the whole world is just designed to be constantly proving their points of you think there are no, it's just not all men, no, all men, every single man is a monstrous rapist. And we just think that the audience needs to know this fact in order to watching our crummy movie. That one actually wasn't even that bad, but it was, but you're sort of okay, they're trying to go and make some pretense of not being totally dogmatic, and it not just being one where the philosophy dictates every single thing in the story. It's no, the philosophy dictates everything in the story. All right. So yeah, but anyway, and then, so that's sort of the highest level. And then when I watched Napoleon, I said, okay, this is it's in between 0 and 1, because they basically just have random actors of color just put into the background with no lines. And it's right? So there's like a random British sailor boy, like you're just sort of like watching this. I mean, and again, it's one where they don't even have any lines. So and the movie is explicitly ineligible for Best Picture under the new Oscar rules, which do require ethnic diversity in leading roles. So like there's one Black French general who is based upon an actual character with a couple lines, but other than that, every spoken line in the entire movie is by white actors. But then they just throw in a few non-white actors just in the background, just to distract you from the movie. Really, so that was my experience. It was like, I mean, it just stands out. So, but anyway, so I would say that one like just barely woke, and yet still at the level where it is distracting from the immersive experience that you're hoping for in a movie. Hey, Jarrett, what's on your mind?
Hey, Brian, thanks for doing this.
Sure thing.
You said in an old interview that socialists make the best villains when you're writing novels. Could you explain that?
Did I say socialists?
Yeah.
So I said that?
Yeah.
When you're writing a novel, I don't remember saying that actually. Let's see. I mean, so obviously in Ayn Rand's novels, we've got socialist villains. In all 4 for 4, we've got socialist villains. In terms of other novels that I like, I'd be surprised if I did say that, because like in other novels that I like, I would say that I don't think they've really got socialist villains. So Tolstoy basically never has a socialist villain. I mean, Tolstoy, you might say he doesn't really have villains. He's got, there's the protagonist, and then there are like normal petty human beings that if you really were a good Christian, you would rise above and would not judge them. But let's see. So, like in War and Peace, like the closest thing that you've got to villains in War and Peace are all the members of the Karagan family. Although even there, the ultimate point is not that they're to blame for everything, but if you really understood Christianity properly, you would see through them and forgive them, and then they wouldn't be able to go and wreak their harm. And Dostoevsky, similarly, I would say, not really socialist villains. Okay, so in Crime and Punishment, there it actually is fair to say that he's got. If you think of let me put it this way: if you think of the main character Raskolnikov as actually a villain for most of the story until he learns his lesson, right? Maybe an anti-hero is a better way of putting it. But essentially, Raskolnikov is explicitly inspired by the nihilist and socialist Nechayev, who also indirectly inspires Lenin. And they're like basically like you might, if you've only remember the detail or like the rough outline of the plot, you might not remember him as being a socialist. But the key idea of Raskolnikov, of Lenin, of Nechayev, and much of the really almost this whole 19th century Russian radical tradition is step one. Like, suppose you could go and save the entire world by killing one child. Shouldn't you do that? And then and then you're like, okay, well, I guess there's a lot of philosophy. And then it's like, okay, and now I've got like a bunch of mass murder that's planned, and so let's go and do it because it'll save the world. And like, well, wait a second. You didn't show there'd be any such benefits of what you're doing. You start off getting all excited, thinking I'm going to do the small evil for a great good, and then in practice it just comes down to I'm going to do great evil, ha ha ha, right? And that is the main idea of Crime and Punishment: is that he goes and he murders this old moneylender just to prove that he's not bound by the moral law. But when he goes and is explaining his philosophy, it's all, well, it's basically like I'm just like a hardcore utilitarian, and I think that it's definitely worth doing things that would be condemned by standard morality if there'd be great good that will come. And then there's this disinterest with showing that any great good comes. So, I have this blog post called The Banality of Leninism on this theme of a real utilitarian, when someone says, let's go and do mass murder for the greater good, checks his work and says, well, wait, like, why would that be a good way of doing this? Like, is there even any evidence at all? Like, is there any alternate routes, anything like that? In any case, I would say that Raskolnikov is totally part of that Russian radical socialist tradition. And so you can think of him in that light. Let's see, for other ones. Yeah. You just sort of veering into graphic novels, which I know people did not vote for as being the first thing. But so probably the most famous graphic novel of all time, Watchmen. Not exactly a socialist villain, but I don't want to give it away, but definitely again another one of these. I've got a plot. It's going to save mankind. It will seem evil to normal people, but trust me, it's going to be great. At least that character seems like he puts a lot more thought into it. Not to give too much away, but he might not have been right, as it turns out. Let's see. All right, I think I'll leave that there. All right, other questions? All right, and by the way, like I said, so I am recording all this, but if you've got questions so controversial, you don't want to have them recorded. Once people run out of the questions they want to do publicly, then I'll turn off the recording, and then we can do the questions that you don't want the world to know about. So, and I'm happy to do those too. Yeah. Is there anything that controversial? I don't know. It's kind of fun just to see what people are worried about. Sometimes people are just worried about strange things, or they're just a little bit nervous. But then again, maybe just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you, right? All right, other movies.
Do you have any movies with economic principles that you like? Other People's Money comes to mind. I really like the
Yes, that one has the famous speech. That one's quite good. I mean, there is the movie A Day Without a Mexican, which isn't really a great movie, but it definitely has this pro-immigration theme, so I like that one. Let's see. So thinking about so in terms of economic ideas, I would say that the Star Wars prequels, not the original series, but the prequels are a very nice illustration of the economic idea of backwards induction, because the Emperor does actually have a very carefully worked out plan in the prequels. Right now, you might say that it's a little too good to be true, but he is really reasoning from, okay, I want to become Emperor, so in order to become Emperor, I've got to go and wipe out the Jedi. In order to wipe out the Jedi, I've got to go and get a fantastic apprentice. I've got to go and get a civil war going. And if you go and watch those, it is really very well crafted in terms of he's reasoning backwards from the end result to figure out the optimal strategy in order to get everything that he wants to happen. Now, once you switch over to the original trilogy, and then the Emperor is a complete moron. So that it's one where it doesn't seem like it ever occurs to him that Darth Vader might want to go and ally with his son against him, right? And also the Emperor thinks, I'll totally Luke Skywalker is just going to kill his dad, and then he'll ally with me. That seems like it totally makes sense. So that one is very poorly reasoned. The only story you could really have is the Emperor got dementia or something in between the two in those 20 years. But given what's established about the Sith being able to slow down their aging and so on, that doesn't make too much sense. Let's see. Other ones that have good economics in them. Let's see. So actually the founder, the McDonald's biopic of Ray Kroc is pretty good. I mean, it's one where the tone isn't it just monstrous? This guy who didn't really create McDonald's at all was the one that made all the money off of it. So there definitely is that tone to it. But first of all, they have some really good scenes about how it is that McDonald's came up with their assembly line process. So there's this very cool scene where one of the characters, actually it's the one played by the libertarian character from Parks and Recreation, Ron Swanson. So basically the scene, they go and they chalk out their entire kitchen for McDonald's, and then they just do rearrangements of everything and keep measuring what would be the most efficient way to go and run the restaurant. But even though the tone of the movie it's totally ridiculous, it's just like an outrage that Ray Kroc, who didn't really come up with McDonald's, is the one that made all the money off of it. But if you watch the movie closely, it's like, yeah, but the guys who came up with the idea were terrible at actually spreading it. And what value is the idea if you don't spread it? And Ray Kroc is the one who had the vision to go and say, all right, you've got this really good idea. Let me go and duplicate it and make it of value to the world. So I'd say that if you really are watching the movie, you realize actually it is Ray Kroc is the one that did the really important part, and the other guys, they had a contribution, but on the other hand, if without Ray Kroc, then basically McDonald's would be at most one nice restaurant somewhere in Pasadena. And it's because of him that billions and billions were served. So that one's quite good. The greed is good speech from the original Wall Street's very good. Right, so that was quite good. I quite like that one. I mean, the character is shown as being horrible and dishonest, but the speech there's is really could easily have been an Ayn Rand speech. So that one is good. And then let's see, I just had another one that I had in mind that's now slipping my memory. Let's see. Hopefully it'll come back to me. Sort of, every movie about hostile takeovers, I think, is didactically worthwhile because I keep telling people that capitalism has been neutered by regulation of hostile takeovers in the biggest capital market in the world, which is the US. Whenever people talk about how terrible it is that Disney's being mismanaged, you realize there was a time when someone could go and buy up 51% of the stock and then summarily fire the management. That is the normal way that things work, and it's only because of a bunch of regulations that started in the 60s and then they really piled them on in the 80s that it's almost impossible to do this now. That's why Elon Musk, his purchase of Twitter was not a hostile takeover. That was a friendly one where he got the current managers to agree to sell. But back in the good old days, he would just have bought 51% of the stock and fired them without any further negotiations. So that was how things used to be back in the good old days. And there really are some amazing stories like the United Fruit Company. There was I think before World War I, there was a hostile takeover that really was that simple. Let's see. And then there was what other one about business. I don't know. I'm blanking on it, but
I think there's an old HBO movie about barbarians at the gate. That talked
about the R.J. Reynolds takeover.
Right.
Yes. And I think that was one that really did make a big difference for regulation. I think that was one that actually inspired the last big wave of regulation. I think that regulation came after that and was inspired by it, not 100%. All right, let's see.
Thank you.
Other great ones. So another random one that keeps popping back to my head. There's this great movie from either 40s or 50s called House of Strangers, which this is actually, in a way, you might say this is Epicurean themes because it's a family drama where there's the first generation Italian immigrant father who's very rich, and he sort of uses his money in order to go and control all of his sons who wind up hating him. And you just sort of see how the real secret of happiness is not having money. It's having, getting to spend time with people's company that you enjoy. And while he is able to go and make everyone pretend to like him, in the process, he actually winds up being totally isolated. Hardly the only movie that has that theme, but still definitely a good one. I like that one a lot. I've seen it 2 times. So holds up. Let's see. Anything else? Other things on your mind? Anything? Yeah, Ricardo.
Yes, hello, thank you.
Hi.
It's nice seeing you live. It's 5 a.m. here, but I'm keeping awake, noting
Where are
down
you?
the movie
España?
recommendations.
Where are you?
I'm in Germany. I'm Mexican, but living in Germany.
All
Yeah,
right.
very pro-immigration, as you can see.
Ausgezeichnet.
Yeah, boy.
Ja,
Ausländer hier.
Mein Deutsch ist nicht so gut. Ich lerne schon Deutsch. Aber ich bin Ausländer in Deutschland. Yes.
All
Anyway.
right. So actually, let me come back lately. So after you do your question, let me do my favorite German movies.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So I was thinking when you said that they casted an 80-year-old now,
Yeah.
and he's doing the action movies and stuff, and it made me wonder. I just wanted to bounce this thought off of you that modern movies seem to be transitioning from an exaggeration of reality, because movies is a guy fighting another 20 guys and he wins. But we can somehow make that realistic because he's a guy, usually young, and he wins, he's the hero. But now we're seeing movies where there's a woman, sometimes she's like 15 years old, and she fights 10 men and she's stronger. And also with the old guys now being, this 80-year-old guy, he goes, beats. So now it's been transitioning. That's what it made me think, from an exaggeration of reality to a misrepresentation or complete detachment from reality. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So, of course, we've got rich traditions of mythology that do involve superpowered heroines and goddesses and demigoddesses. You know, definitely more on the male side, but still, like, the idea of having the superpowered woman is very well established in literature. It's been around for a long time. So I don't think that's that jarring. I think a lot of the problem, again, is just miscasting. So, Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, like, I just totally believe her. She's awesome. On the other hand, Brie Larson as Captain Marvel, I just, like, when I saw the trailer, I was just laughing. She just totally miscast. She's ridiculous. She's a great actress. If you see her in Room, she's like a great performance, but like, she's just not a superhero. So it's one where if you want, basically, when you set a quota of, we need to go and have a certain number of, we need to have demographics for our heroes, and then it's like, okay, well, what have we got down in the acting pool? Like, when the quota is too big, then you wind up just going down, and just miscasting people. So in the idea of just one person being able to fight 20 people, that's just so long lasting. That's not, it's just been around for thousands of years. It'll be in your Epic of Gilgamesh or Hercules or whatever. So, I mean, it's one where if we had never had stories like that, I guess they would probably seem stupid, but they're so much a part of the human condition. And I think the fact that they're in the mythologies of so many different people shows that this is a story that really does connect with something. I mean, even if only just sheer power fantasy of like, oh, if only I could go and point my finger at people, make them die, wouldn't that be cool? But it is a good story. I mean, the main problem is just that they are so determined to hit demographic quotas that then they are stuck going and just casting people that are not right for the role. So, like, there just aren't a lot of Gal Gadots. Like, there just aren't. So that's where I would go with that, I think. Yeah. Like for example, there's been, there are a lot of Chinese sword and sorcery type movies where I'll just say, like, it never seems to me that they are running out of fantastic Chinese actresses to show kicking ass, right? They're like, they just got enough over there that they can go and fill a lot of movies with fantastic, credible actresses who can kill 20 guys with their sword or whatever. But the West doesn't have that, from what I can tell. Now, on the question of great German movies, let's see. So, there's so many good ones. There's the Tom Tückwer movies. So there's Run Lola Run, which is probably the most famous one. Here's another one that I think is almost, maybe even better, called, it's usually translated as The Princess and the Warrior. In German, it's, let's see, it's Der Krieger und die Kaiserin, The Warrior and the Princess. Let's see. There's a great German zombie movie. So let's see. Not really a zombie movie. It's a German post-apoc movie called Hell, which is just German for light. It isn't hell. It's as we would understand it. That would be Hölle, but it's hell. Let's see, some other German movies that I really like. Got more, but they're not coming to me right away.
Any Werner Herzog?
Yeah. So out of his, the one that I really like is Arhire, The Wrath of God. And I think that one actually is if I remember correctly, that one's in German, even though it's about Spaniards.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that one is actually quite good. I like that one a lot. And I can't remember the name of one of the actors, but there's
Klaus Kinski.
Yeah, Klaus Kinski, exactly. Yeah. So I wrote a role-playing game called Neuschleistein, which is basically the most expensive slasher flick that will never be made because it would ruin the name of Germany's greatest tourist site of Neuschwanstein Castle. But basically, it's a story about a troupe of Wagnerian opera troupe that is performing for Wagner and King Ludwig at Neuschwanstein Castle. But then it turns out they're in a slasher flick. And it's one where, like, it would just be so expensive to go and shoot this movie, because that's one of the main things you usually do in slasher flicks is it's like, let's shoot it at a camp. But it costs like $300 to go and rent the camp for the week. Whereas to go and shoot that one on location, they would never get permission because it's going to tarnish the whole image of Germany itself, as well as definitely that tourist site. Yeah,
Did you,
that's definitely was a fun game to run.
speaking of Germany and castle, did you watch The Man in the High Castle, the one about the
Yeah,
alternate?
yeah. So I mean, I watched I think like the first 2 seasons of that, and it was definitely like it was just fun as alternate history. It was like it was one where again was sort of like it had like the plot laziness of the multiverse and people sort of shifting in and out of different universes. So I mean, to me, that's there is a point where it's just such lazy writing and where the world is just so flexible that there's really no constraint on what can happen or not. So I didn't like that so much.
Yeah.
And then in the second season, where it turns out that this one seemingly innocuous German doctor is actually the next Führer planning on doing a nuclear first strike on the Empire of Japan, it was definitely cool to see Albert Speer's dream German Nazi parliament building on the big, or like on at least the mid-size screen. But again, as a story, it was just like, this really does not make a lot of sense here. And then you like there's just lots of weird things like the Battle of Virginia Beach. It's like the Germans are going to be able to do something like D-Day over miles of ocean. It's like, you realize how hard it was to do over 20 miles of ocean, and like to do that over thousands of miles. That's just like almost like really hard. So yeah, that didn't seem very plausible. And the idea that the Japanese and the Germans would like split America at the Mississippi River or whatever, that seemed pretty dumb. But so it was definitely good enough for me to like the first season. I enjoyed it and I wanted to watch the second season. The second season seemed kind of dumb, and they also had this weird thing of the like, basically, despite the fact that it's like Nazi Germany, still you get like German hipsters and hippies from the 60s walking around, and I'm like, I don't think if Hitler was there, there'd be hippies. At least they wouldn't be walking around acting like it's cool. Oh yeah, that does remind me of like another one of my very favorite German movies, which is especially relevant today, actually. So it's the Baader-Meinhof complex. So it's the movie about the Baader-Meinhof gang. So if you ever been puzzled, like, what in the hell does like the Palestinian cause and leftism have in common? This movie will like you totally understand it by the end, because you realize, all right, so basically the Palestinian movement is one of the many anti-colonial movements that is backed by the Soviet bloc, right? And part of what's going on is that they're backing the Communist Party of Palestine and other like radical socialist groups, but also, like, once those groups are there, then there's other Palestinian groups that don't care about socialism that are Islamist groups, and they're all sort of working together, and all getting the same paychecks from the Soviets. And so then they'll go, well, of course. So like the Baader-Meinhof gang, when they need to go and flee Germany, well, they go and they hang out in Jordan training with the PLO. Right. And, and at the same time, this all ties in with all of these other now mostly defunct terrorist movements from the 70s, like the IRA in Ireland. But you've also got like the Mononoros? What are the urban guerrillas from Bolivia? Someone who remembers Latin America better than me. The Matamoros. All right. So this is all worked in. So you see that there was this rich ecosystem of all these different terrorist groups, all basically getting money from the Soviet bloc surreptitiously. And then you take away the money, but you still have all these social connections that have been formed. And so removing the money, it definitely does mean that the groups don't care that much what the Russians think anymore, but still the ones that actually train together and have connections and they've got business dealings, and like, we go and give you drugs for weapons, you give us weapons for drugs. All of that makes sense, and it just lasts. So, in the same way that if my family did business with your family, then it makes sense that I'll be doing business with you. So this all fits in with like, what is the leftist Palestinian connection? As people said, like isn't like Hamas by almost any measure right-wing group? And it's like, well, you got to understand that these groups are basically very closely descended to either patrilineally or at least fraternally to a bunch of radical socialist Palestinian groups. right? And you may say, yeah, but don't they like kill each other? It's like, yeah, well, guess what? Within the very same terrorist group, they kill each other. So like it doesn't mean that they all love each other, but it means they got a same mindset and they've got these social ties. So sociologists would not be puzzled at all that this connection still does continue.
Yes, it's definitely been a very confusing trip. For example, when I came to Germany about a year ago, I made a friend. She became not one of my closest friends, but somewhat close friend. She's from Jordan, she's Muslim. And one of the things we bonded over is that she was a little bit more conservative, not to walk once in a way being Muslim or religious immunizes you a lot from that. But now that the Palestine conflict came, she's completely gone to the left, and I was very confused of the radical switch. And then it's understanding all of this, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially because it's a fairly one-way thing. It's not like Hamas has to come out and say we're pro-trans in order to keep the support. Right? So it's asymmetric. So it's like, well, given that like the left will support me and they're not asking for anything in return, that's where it's that's sort of the easiest way to go and switch sides. If like you just like we're totally down with what you want and we're not going to go and bother you, and maybe in some distant future, but for now it's just not it's just not on the agenda at all. All right.
Have you guys seen Persepolis related to the Middle East? It's a great movie.
Yeah. So I actually got to see that at the
well.
Palm Springs Film Festival when it was originally released, and I've read both books, so I'm definitely a big fan. I've got a blog post or two on it. There's this really funny scene where the author of Persepolis as a teenager is talking to, I think, her uncle, who's a member of Tuda, which is the Iranian Communist Party. And when there's this massive explosion of religious fanaticism, he's there saying, yeah, well, the thing about the masses is you kind of have to throw them this during the transition period because they're not really at the level of this. And then it's like, well, then why do you want to have anything to do with this anyway? Isn't this like totally the opposite? What do you think? Well, but you have to understand it's all part of a process. And, like eventually we'll come out on top, right? Which, is classic communist strategy during any kind of major social upheaval, just to get on the side of whoever wants to go and violently overthrow the status quo, and then form a coalition. And the normal communist strategy is like, it's just gonna be a coalition. We're all equal here. It's not communism at all. We just want to see the table, and all we want is to control the secret police and the Department of Defense. And other than that, we're cool. And this is actually a rough history of Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe from 1945 to 48. Was all these coalition governments that they were part of, and they really made a big deal about it. Like, it's not communist domination. It's just, we're just part of it. Like until 1989, the ruling party of East Germany was not called the Communist Party. It was called Sozialistische Einheitspartei, Socialist Unity Party, which came from 1945. All of the people that favor socialism and are on the side of progress, let's all join together. But then the next communist stage is, and now anybody that's it's not a communist party, but we're going to get rid of the people who've said anti-communist things. And then once you get rid of those people, now we're getting rid of the people who have not had anything good to say about communists. And then you keep doing this. In Hungary, they call this salami politics, where you start off with a long salami and you slice off everybody until finally you're just left with your core of hardcore communists and absolutely terrified fellow travelers. And the funny thing about Iran is that the Ayatollah Khomeini was quite smart, and he did it to them before they did it to him. So he got the coalition, but he got control of the levers of power, and then he went and massacred and started by jailing and then massacring all of his Marxist and socialist allies. There's one quite memorable incident in, I think, the late 80s, where there's all of these members of Tuda and other Marxist and socialist parties that are being kept in the prisons of the Ayatollah Khomeini. And then order goes out, we need to go and interview and find out the whole religious history of all these people that are political prisoners. And they go and do it. And then the Ayatollah, he is sufficiently consistent where he says, look, well, we've got a law saying that you can be executed for apostasy. So basically, if you were ever actually a practicing Muslim, then we can execute you for apostasy. But if you were never that, then we can't. And so they did all these interviews and got the biographies. And the ones that I think it really was the ones that were very adamant, like I never had any slight association with Islam. It's like, oh, just keep them in prison. We don't kill them. But everyone else, there was just like a week where they just massacred thousands of them. And yeah, so that was the kind of guy that the uncle of the author Persepolis was. I don't know if he actually was arrested, but he was one of those guys who had some illusion of, don't worry, we'll be able to go and get the upper hand here, and did not. But yeah, that book is quite good. I mean, it's very psychologically honest, because basically she shows herself being, despite the fact that her whole family, they hate the Ayatollah, they hate Islamism, but as soon as war breaks out, then they're completely pro-Iran and they just want to wipe out everyone in Iraq. So it's like you get to see this rally around the flag effect, and just to see how fundamentally nationalist human beings are, that you can absolutely despise and want to go and murder everyone in the current government. And yet, if your country's attacked, then you rally behind them and say, well, we've just got to go and work together. And which it's like, gee, that's pretty weird. I mean, I remember, so my father-in-law was actually conscripted to be in the Romanian Communist Army. And when my sons who had gotten some anti-conscription talks from me, they went and they were telling my grandparents, well, like, yeah, like, you totally shouldn't fight. And they're like, that's your country, you have to. It's like, but you hate the communists. Why are you going to fight for the communists? It's like, but it's Romania. It's like,
My girlfriend is Polish, and she says the same. You have to fight for your country.
yes.
And yeah, she says it's not like that anymore, especially people from the West.
Mhm.
Like, I wouldn't die for Mexico. No offense, I like my country, I like my food, but
Yeah.
I just want to apply as a refugee or to Europe.
Yeah, I mean, it is odd, especially when it's like, well, like, what should people in North Korea do? Shouldn't they just lay down their arms and surrender? Isn't that the right thing?
Yeah.
It's like, they should bravely defend their country. Like, from what? Could it possibly get worse? I mean, normally when you say things couldn't possibly get worse, it's like, yeah, it can get worse. But like North Korea, yeah, just like whatever happens is going to be better than what they got.
Even Cambodia with Pol Pot.
Yeah. So definitely, surrender. Yeah, that worked out. So it was a big improvement. Still had communist rule for decades, but compared to Pol Pot, big improvement.
It seems like a problem every time a tyrant wants to kind of enact a utopia. It usually results in mass murder.
Right. Yeah, I've got a blog post on this because there's two conflicting theories. This one is that you shouldn't really try to get big improvements in society, and the other one is avoid totalitarianism. And these are two very different theories, because you're sort of like the Edmund Burke story is just don't try to change anything too much. Right. And that is a story. And then the other one is no, totalitarianism is the bad thing. And that's what's actually so it's not change that's bad. It's that thing that is bad. I mean, so, like, since I was mentioning Lenin, I think one really big, common thread of all of your horrible totalitarian despotisms is there just was not a lot of thought paid to why this would be an improvement over the status quo. There really wasn't. So, Lenin, when he gets power, it seems like he barely has any idea about what he even wants to do other than murder people. So that is, and I mean, in terms of like economic management, it's sort of like, well, we'll just sort of use accounting to figure out what to do. And it's at that level of like totally insipid. He's just sort of making it up. But what he does know he wants to do is make kill lists. That's quite clear. Right. And so if you read the introduction that I wrote to this dystopian novel, Pictures of the Socialistic Future, this is a book written in around 1890. And it says, if the German socialists ever take control of Germany, they will establish a monstrous tyranny, and they will start shooting people for fleeing the country. So the book really actually has this it's right in the book. Okay, so it's like, wow, either the guy got really lucky or he saw something in the souls of the German socialists decades before they actually got power. Right. And saying like the obvious thing is if you go and read these people, they don't want to talk about questions like under socialism, who takes out the garbage? Under socialism, what do you do to people that don't like you? And they're and there's not only is there no curiosity, but when someone asks, they get angry. It's like, yeah, you sound like you're just going to start murdering people. You just seem like a terrible person. And like I ask a reasonable question like under socialism, who takes out the garbage? And then you either refuse to answer or get angry or just says like, that's an anti-scientific question, an unscientific question. It's like, yeah, you seem like a fanatic who either you're just refusing to think about this or you have thought about it and you don't want to tell me what your plan is because your plan is probably gun to the head. So
Yeah.
Which of the two stories do you favor, Brian? The big being against big sweeping changes or totalitarianism? Because it doesn't seem like they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah, they're not. But I'd say is basically all the evidence we have of utopias gone wrong are the totalitarian ones. The other ones are just basically have not been tried. Part of it is because like to do really big sweeping changes right away, normally you do have to go and just terrify people.
Yeah.
So there's this chapter in David Friedman's Machinery Freedom called Revolution is the Hell of It. Right now, we're at the closest that we're going to get to libertarian utopia being tried suddenly, which is Argentina. I mean, it's nothing like an actual socialist revolution because he doesn't have a majority. He doesn't even have a majority of the seats. He's going to need to compromise with a bunch of people. I mean, like you could say, well, maybe he's got a big plan to go and like wipe out everyone else, and then like really go hardcore. I think that's crazy. That just seems super unlikely to me. I wouldn't, not impossible, but yeah. So anyway, like I'm very optimistic that at least this will be a lot better than what they got right now. I'm also going to go on. So I'm going to go on the record and say, no matter what happens, people will call it a disaster. They could have like GDP, the best GDP growth in Latin America. They could have like no unemployment. They could have like tons of people start trying to move to Argentina, and
they can achieve immortality.
But basically just the very like if he fulfills his promises to cut education spending, if he cuts education spending by 5%, if he cuts government health spending by 5%, people will just say that is by definition an absolute disaster and his rule was terrible. Because for most people, there's just this list of policies that aren't judged by their consequences. They're judged by this is what all civilized countries do is they have adequate funding of health, education, the environment, so on. And we are like the other stuff isn't even very important to us as long as the means are suitable. So I think there have been quite a few very radical changes that have worked out great. So biggest one is end of communism. There were for a bunch of years a lot of people wanted to do go slow, but and there are a couple countries that did go slow, like Belarus, that still are living under something not that different from the old Soviet system. But then the countries that went fast, so like Poland, the Baltics, Czechia, these are the countries that have done the very best. People still get mad about shock therapy, and it's like, look, shock therapy, it did not cause famines. There's high unemployment as people move from industries that are useless to useful industries. But it's one where it's like people are really happy if like millions of people die for socialism. That's fine. You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. But to go and fire a few million government employees who do not starve to death or anything else in order to go and move away from communism, that's horrible. And we're going to complain about it until the end of time. So yeah, the economist Anders Eslin has written multiple books about the transition that he was involved in. Basically, he keeps writing the same book, but the books get better each time. So whatever the last book that he wrote on this is I think the best one. Yeah. So there's a great movie about the Cotton Forest Massacre. I can't remember the name. I just remember a quote from the movie about the crime and the lie. The crime being the massacre, and then the lie being decades of the government saying, "Oh no, they were killed by Hitler, thousands of miles away, buried with newspapers from 1939." Yeah, it's weird. All right. So let's see. Anyone got questions they want to do off the record? Should we end the official parts, or what do you think?
Yeah,
Can I ask one more
can't wait
question
for it
that
to
Yeah,
be
sure,
back.
totally, totally. One last question.
I'm curious what you think about some recent Disney movies that seem to me to be
Ah.
quite propagandistic, like Frozen 2 and Strange World. And to me, it was just very blatant, especially in Strange World, that it was a morality play
Yeah.
about the evils of fossil fuels. But I brought this up to some people.
I thought it was like an LGBT movie. I haven't seen it, but I thought
it was that too. But
because the characters have no defined gender, right?
I don't. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is a bit ambiguous their gender, but the bigger thing is it's really a pretty blatant criticism of fossil fuels, and especially even in use for agriculture, because the thing is like this plant that they used to eat turns out to be destroying the planet, so they decide just to do away with it.
Yeah.
But I've shared this with some people who I would think agree with me ideologically, but they really didn't notice it. And I wonder how much you think this kind of propaganda actually affects public views.
Right. I think basically you have to hit people over the head with a hammer in order to change their political views by showing them a movie, even a lot of them. Because people generally are just not paying attention for what the message, and like almost any subtlety it's lost on people. So I mean, you might say maybe if you just give them like 1,000 movies like that, that would be enough. So maybe, but I doubt that any individual movie makes much difference there. Frozen 2, I don't remember it just being, I just remember it being like just much worse than the original one. The original one, in a sense, it did have an agenda, which is the love interest will not be the important person in the story. And the real love will be between the two sisters. And then there'll be this guy that's around and maybe he could be a love interest, but it's not clear. Maybe he's just friends. And then there's the one guy who is the villain who looks like he's going to sweep one of the sisters off her feet, but he's actually just using her. So in a way that is sort of fitting, like it's not maximally woke in that not all men were horrible, monstrous villains in the movie. Unlike in, say, Promising Young Woman, where just every guy turned out to be bad. Let's see. Probably like my favorite of these movies, where I think the agenda is pretty clear, but I just love the movie, The Greatest Showman. Here, they got a bearded woman in there. Like the whole theme is clearly on inclusion at the highest level. But at the same time, like the songs are just so good. So like I'm a sucker for almost any musical with good songs. Like if you got that, then I'll forgive almost anything else if I come out singing your songs. But I mean, the other thing that's crazy about The Greatest Showman is that it actually is an extreme white savior tale, because Hugh Jackman is this capitalist white male businessman who goes and he finds all of these circus freaks, and they're all none of them are doing well. None of them have good jobs. They're many of them are just living in the shadows. And this guy says, "Hey, I've got a business idea, and I will hire you, and I will then go and turn you into a star. And I am the one with the vision to see that what everyone else sees as a problem for you is actually something that people will pay money to see. And I'm going to thrill the world, and I'm going to take this tour all over." And so it is really a white savior tour, as well as a great story of an incredible capitalist who sees an opportunity that no one else sees. Like, who else sees Siamese twins and says, this is a business opportunity? But Hugh Jackman does see this in the story. So, I mean, it's one where I think the writers intended it to be just a very extreme DEI story, but they actually wound up writing one of the great pro-capitalist stories. But that combined with the songs, I like it a lot. So there's actually a sing-along version coming to the Alamo Draft House in my area in January. So I'm totally there for the sing-along. I love that stuff.
In terms of hitting people over the head with that kind of propaganda, I feel like that maybe has happened with environmentalist tropes. So I'm thinking of Dr. Seuss's The Lorax. I feel like
that one's really old. That one's really old, actually. You're right.
Yeah.
But I mean, so they did the movie version, but that one is very faithful to the book, actually. I remember that. So, I mean, as to what Dr. Seuss, whether he had some big green agenda or he just thought it was a good story, I don't know. In terms of whether, eco cartoons have turned kids into environmentalists, I guess it's possible. But again, it's one where it's for a lot of people, they just sort of miss the message, really. Again, the ones where, I mean, I think probably the ones where I think it's most likely to actually change people's minds are like all of the Me Too movies. Because these are ones where it's very explicit. Like there's a strong female, there's the female character who's sympathetic, we care about her, and then men do horrible things to her, and men are just horrible jerks. And the only possible way for this for things to be righted is for like women to team up with the government to go and crush the jerks. So I think there were a bunch of Me Too movies that were made after Me Too where the agenda is really clear. I think partly because I think those movies would primarily be watched by adult women. I think basically it is designed to speak exactly to the audience and telling the audience that you are very oppressed. So I think those would probably be the most effective propagandistically. Obviously, there's also a number of movies made for about oppression of blacks in modern America, not just slavery movies, but so there's like classic ones like Boys in the Hood or New Jack City. Although again, these are ones where you watch the movie and you're like, we're supposed to go and get mad at white people for this, but there's barely any white people even in the movie. Like almost all like all the characters really with speaking roles practically are black characters. It really is just a story of life within the subculture. It isn't really, you have to actually have some big theory about how the only reason the subculture exists is because white people did something which then go, and this is systemic racism or whatever, but it's not one that you can really see very easily from watching the movie. You sort of have to begin with a theory in order to believe in it. Or even like Straight Outta Compton. Again, that's one is about NWA. So that's also one where there's barely any white characters even in the movie. It's all really internal to subculture. There's a few movies that came out were based about police brutality. So it was evil white cops going and doing horrible stuff. Those are ones that got a lot of praise from woke critics. I don't know that they were. And then, any of them were actually very successful with black audiences, with any audience. So, Fruitvale Station was one. That one was pretty unwatchable in my view. It was just so heavy-handed, just tiresome. Yeah. So, in terms of any other Disney movies, there probably was an agenda in the new Star Wars trilogy to go and decenter whiteness, and we're not going to have any important white male characters in the story. But at the same time, they just sucked. So I don't know.
Yeah, let's not talk about them anymore.
I want to be like Ray, one of the most boring women in all of cinema. I'm going to be like Finn. Boring. Yeah, even they attempt to have some great friendship, like Ray. Just I just don't believe that you care about each other. Just not well-developed characters at all. All right. So anything else that you don't don't mind asking publicly, and then once we finish with that, we'll shut it off. Anything else? All right. So in that case, I will shut off the recording. All right. So good night to everybody in Movie Land. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you wind up watching something or other that I recommended and getting some value out of it. Oh yeah, so favorite TV shows that are non-obvious. So you might have seen the Hanenya Andreessen Henderson one on The Shield, which I'm also a huge fan of. And that's one where I don't think it's giving anything away, just to say that the ending is fantastic. You will be completely satisfied. It's great. So whereas Dexter, which is still probably my favorite show in the history of television, but it has 95 great episodes. And then episode 96 is just, it's just terrible. And then they tried redoing the last season, and that one was like a giant woke agenda. There's the original Dexter would have totally gotten away with this. You people are not especially clever or figuring anything out, but somehow let's just go and change it so that because of wokeness, Dexter gets defeated. So anyway, that one really ticked me off. Although I did watch the whole thing, to my confess, but I'm not going to watch it again. Whereas watch the original series 4 or 5 times. Just love it so much. And it's got these great Dostoevskian themes, but it's also funny and really just hilarious to me. And just the characters are so lovable and well developed. And furthermore, you can say diverse cast, but again, it was not one where they sat around saying we need to have the following demographics. Instead, it was one that said, let's just come up with some great characters who would be in Miami. And they just came up with this incredible characters. So like, and they found fantastic actors that just breathe life into them. So awesome stuff. All right, so I'll leave that for tonight, and then we'll switch over to the secret questions. So if you want to hear secret questions, you'll have to go and watch it live, but next time. All right, so signing off and switching over to the secret questions.